I am in my happy place. What's a happy place, you might ask? It's listening to canned rock music. It's getting ready to talk Broncos with Andrew Masons. It's Orange and Blue today, 3:30 p.m. Mountain Time. And we are here for you, Mace. I'm also in my happy place because I'm writing about the draft. And that always makes me happy.
Yeah, especially makes you happy after a bad season, right? Because
Yeah.
when you can focus on the draft, you can turn the page. Of course, this is where I think, is it fair to say that because the Broncos would sacrifice significant draft capital, that you wouldn't be happy with Sean Payton as a head coach?
Yeah, I think it's just too much, really. Now, I know the reports. Was it Ian Rappaport that had the report like, hey, the Broncos are kind of on the same page as compensation? Yeah, you could be on the same page, but man, that's going to sting if you lose draft picks when you're already down a couple of draft picks from the Russell Wilson deal.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. I mean, that's why, look, if you'd say, okay, the two big names are Jim Harbaugh and Sean Payton. I don't think Sean Payton is a first, a second, and a third round pick better than Jim Harbaugh.
Right.
And I actually think that Jim Harbaugh is probably better for what this team needs at this moment in time than Sean Payton. And so for all those reasons, if it's one of those two, I'd prefer Jim Harbaugh.
Yes, and we may get coaching changes anyway if the Cowboys go out and get beat this wild card weekend, and then Sean Payton might be in Dallas and not here. But it sounds like the Jim Harbaugh thing, if the Broncos want it, it's there for the taking. What's the latest we know on the coaching search and Jim Harbaugh specifically?
I mean, he interviewed yesterday. The interview was 2 hours. It was virtual. Now, virtual interviews generally aren't going to be as long as in-person interviews. Just kind of the nature of that. So the Broncos, for example, had a 4.5-hour interview in person with Nathaniel Hackett last year. So it's a different dynamic that goes into it. But I will also say this: you have somebody in that interview process in Condoleezza Rice, the former Secretary of State, who not only knows Jim Harbaugh quite well from both of them working at Stanford together a decade ago, or more than a decade ago, but Harbaugh would even use Condoleezza Rice as part of the recruiting process, hey, I mean, this is the kind of person that you're going to be able to take classes from if you come to Stanford. The sort of thing that we can offer at Stanford University, other schools can't. And so, and of course, with Condoleezza Rice being so keenly interested in football, as she's talked about over the years, certainly a business relationship grew between the two of them. So because of that, you have somebody on the other side of the table, the virtual table in the interview room, who basically knows everything there is to know about Jim Harbaugh. So I imagine that the interview, Cecil, didn't have a lot of pleasantries, yada, yada, getting to know you.
Right.
I would imagine they got right down to the business of who's your staff going to be? What's your plan for Russell Wilson? What are you looking at roster-wise, free agency, et cetera?
Yeah, honestly, I think the staff would be question one. But man, 1A is what do you do with Russell Wilson? But for me, it's not just the Russell Wilson answer. And that's where some people may be getting tripped up in this conversation. Like Wilson's here for a year. Maybe that's it. So it can't be just who can fix Russell Wilson. It's about, well, who's going to be here after Russell Wilson in case it doesn't work out. Jim Harbaugh is that type of guy where you know you're going to be good no matter if it's Wilson or a rookie in 2024 or whatever. You're going to have a quality team that's prepared and built the right way.
And don't forget, he's not afraid to not only hand it to the young guy, but to make the changes necessary to accommodate that young quarterback. Look no further than when Alex Smith got injured midway through the 2012 season. After the Niners had already gone to the NFC Championship game the year before, Colin Kaepernick has to come in. And so Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman, they start running a lot of pistol because Kaepernick had done that with Chris Salt at Nevada. And lo and behold, it lets Kaepernick get his feet under him. They keep the train going down on the tracks, and they're in the Super Bowl at the end of the season. So that's another thing about Jim Harbaugh that I think is really notable is that he's not really a scheme coach. He is adapt what we're doing philosophically to the players that we have coached, especially on the offensive side. if he's the Broncos offensive coordinator seats, don't be surprised to see Greg Roman come over from Baltimore. Does seem like Baltimore fans are tired of Greg Roman right now. This may offer kind of a smooth landing spot for him, for Steve Bisciotti in Baltimore to maybe make a change that he wants to make, but ensure that Greg Roman, who has worked for both John Harbaugh and Jim Harbaugh as offensive coordinator, has a place to go. And frankly, Steve, that would excite me because the thing that I like about Greg Roman most is how adaptable he is. I mean,
Right.
Lamar Jackson had an MVP season because Greg Roman rewrote the offense for him. And to me, that's good coaching. Adapting what you do schematically to the talent that you have on hand.
Well, and it seems revolutionary, but it's not. It's just basic. Like, what can you do? Let's do that. I mean, it's the Belichick thing where it's like, I'm not going to ask you to do something you can't do really well. And well, that's what Roman did with Jackson. And as they expected more development as a passer, one, he got hurt, and two, he didn't develop the way that they thought. Although with the Roquan Smith deal today, I'm sure Lamar Jackson maybe isn't that happy, but that's it's not.
Because it brings the
it's orange and blue
tag
today.
It brings the tag into play, is the thing, because now you're not using a tag on Roquan, you're using it on Lamar Jackson. But that being said, would not all be surprised if it's a tag and trade regarding Lamar Jackson this offseason. Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned for that, and stay tuned for more coaching talk, which includes Dan Quinn. Candidate last year, candidate this year, a strong B candidate. I think there's an A level, which does include Sean Payton, maybe not for you or me, but that's the talk. But the B candidate, the number one, is probably Dan Quinn in that conversation.
No doubt, and the rest of the week will be interesting because in terms of how this process goes, you could interview Ejiro Evero today in person because he's on your staff. The Broncos did that; they did have the in-person interview with Evero at team headquarters today. You can't do in-person interviews with anybody working for another team this week. You can do virtual interviews starting tomorrow. And so that means when you're talking about D'Amico Ryans, you're talking about Raheem Morris, and of course, Dan Quinn, you can do virtual interviews with them as soon as tomorrow. So this actually comes into Sean Payton as well. The reason why the Broncos cannot have an in-person interview with Sean Payton until next Tuesday is you cannot do an in-person interview with any coaching candidate who works for another team until one day after the wild card round ends. Okay, Sean Payton doesn't work for the Saints, right? No, but they still hold his rights. So he falls under that umbrella. That's why they can't talk to him in person until the 17th. The wild card round, of course, ends on Monday the 16th when the Cowboys play the Bucs. And that may have impact on what goes on in terms of a coaching search, because if the Bucs beat the Cowboys, do not expect Mike McCarthy to be on the job much longer, which brings the Cowboys into play for Sean Payton or promoting Dan Quinn.
Yeah, and Jerry Jones would be crazy because he is crazy to go after Sean Payton if he could. Super quick on Evero, and I wrote about it earlier today, and now my brain has left me. Was it the Colts that asked for him?
Colts have asked for permission to interview. So that's now the Colts and the Texans that can interview him. And of course, same thing. If they interview him this week, it's virtual. Broncos did the in-person. If they want to interview him in person, they couldn't do it until next Tuesday.
Right. Okay. Larry in the chat room asked what's next for Jerry. I assume Jerry Rosberg, not Jerry Judy. And with Rosberg, I think it's retirement. You and I have talked about it. He doesn't seem real intent on coming back as a special teams coach. Maybe, just maybe, as a consultant, but that's a big maybe too.
Yeah, it's going to depend on who the coach is. I think the best chance of Jerry Rosberg being around the team in some capacity is if Jim Harbaugh is the head coach. He has talked at length about his relationship with the Harbaugh family. As he said, they're so close that they've hung out together, vacationed together. They're the Harburgs or the Rossbaugh, whatever you want to call them. And that's the one scenario that I think where there could be a little bit of arm twisting for Jerry Rosberg to be back in more than just a consultant capacity for the 2023 season, that they may kind of tug at his heart a little bit. If it did happen, with Jim Harbaugh, my expectation is it would be something along the lines of special teams coordinator, assistant head coach, and maybe only like a 1-year thing. And then you hand the reins of special teams off to somebody else. But if you want Jerry Rossberg on this staff, the best chance is probably Jim Harbaugh being aboard. But I also wouldn't be surprised if even with that, he says, nah, I'm good. I wouldn't be surprised though if Jerry Rossberg remains with the Broncos in a consultant type of capacity, even if it's just as simple as wherever he is, whether he's on his dock in Florida, or whether he's doing some next gen hyperbaric work up in the mountains, that he's like reviewing film
Right.
and maybe even reviewing game management procedures to kind of say, okay, we should be doing X, not Y. I think that may be the kind of needle that ends up being threaded for Jerry Rossberg, because he did make himself quite valued around there, and I think there were more than a few players who liked his approach and would like to see him back around the team in some capacity in 23.
Right. We'll get to Edward's question in just a little bit, but I did want to say, Mason, you can chime in with me because I know you'll agree. The great thing about those guys, like a Jerry Rossberg, or even a lot of former players, not every single one, but a lot of former players, they see it so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Like I study and study and study and study this game, and I chart plays, and I study this game, and I study this game, and I'll never know everything. And that's what's so invigorating to me, is like I want to know more. When you sit down, I remember sitting down with Big Al years ago, and like he'd see something that I had noticed that took me quite a long time to notice, and he would sit down, watch something new to him, and notice it immediately. So a guy like Rossberg, he could be on a dock somewhere, turn on the tape, pick it up immediately, type out a certain report, hey, maybe even dictate it, right? Just say it into Dragonfly or whatever, and talk to text, and then boom, you're done, and really not a big time commitment. So it is a possibility.
And what have we learned about the Walton Penner Group so far? They'll spend $400,000 to resod a field for 1 game. They were willing to eat 3+ years of Nathaniel Hackett's contract and dismiss him after 15 games when it wasn't going the way they wanted it to. Resources, spending. I mean, if they spend $200,000 to keep Jerry Rossberg on as a consultant to help with game management and watch some special teams film, that's the kind of thing that they absolutely would do, right? It may be something that I'm not sure the Broncos would have done in the past just because of the cash resources. This ownership group, oh yeah, you want Jerry to spend a few hours reviewing film every week? Here's the check. Go make it happen.
Yep.
So that's one reason why I think even in a limited role, I think we'll still see Jerry Rossberg's name on the staff directory next year.
I hope so. Now back to Edward's question. He said, would Harbaugh choose Vic Fangio as a DC?
No, I don't think so. And I think, and Evero is interviewing with the Colts and Texans, like we mentioned. I don't think he's going to get either one of those jobs. And Evero worked 4 years for Harbaugh, quality control, offensive assistant, defensive assistants, when he was kind of, learning the trade of coaching. I think it will be Evero as the defensive coordinator under Harbaugh if Harbaugh gets the job. The other thing is also, and I said this on Coffee Break this morning, you're Vic Fangio. Do you really want to go back up to in the defensive meeting room with guys who remember you as the head coach and now you're a step lower than that? I can't see that. The other thing on Vic Fangio is we know that Sean Payton has been in touch with him about potentially joining any staff that Payton would put together, which could be in LA. I mean, obviously it could be in Denver if I think right now Harbaugh's plan A at this point. But wherever Sean Payton goes, he may want Vic Fangio on his staff. And so I think for Vic, the option is going to be whatever isn't Denver. It's not like Wade Phillips, where Wade had been away for
15
seasons.
years. Yeah, 20 seasons.
95 through 2014, he was away before he came back. He had a couple of generations that passed right? In that time, I mean, who was left playing around the league from 1995 when Wade Phillips became the defensive coordinator of the Broncos? Like Adam Vinatieri, and that's it. I mean, so yeah, that's something that I really cannot see happening. And there are a lot of reasons why I'd rather have Evero. One reason is this. If he doesn't get a job this cycle, he's certainly setting himself up to get a coaching job in a future cycle. And you know what that means, Cease? 2 third-round picks, 2 third-round comp picks. The Broncos don't get any comp picks this year if Evero leaves because he's only been there for a year. But if a coach has been on a staff with an organization for 2 years, then you're eligible for 2 third-round picks, one each in back-to-back years in the compensatory pool, because that would be a minority candidate that you had that became the head coach somewhere else. It's true for head coach, true for GM as well.
Yeah, and with Ajar Evero, it just seems like Aaron Glenn or D'Amico Ryans, like he's coming. But this year's a year too soon. It's Glenn's time. It's Ryan's time. It seems like that's the proper coaching cycle that we see in the NFL.
I think that's absolutely fair. And I think it'd be the best thing for the Broncos as well. And boy, I don't know how many conversations you were part of in the locker room yesterday, Cease, but boy, the one thing you heard over and over Sunday night, Monday morning, those guys on defense really want Evero back.
Mm-hmm.
All of them do that. It's basically unanimous on that. So
give them what they want, especially the way that they played.
They played well. I mean, it did tail off toward the end. I think there was a moment where the injuries did catch up with them. And this is where like the Draymond Jones decision becomes interesting, because that seemed like the final straw for the defense. And when they lost Draymond Jones, and they, with all respect to the guys who remained, they didn't get the same kind of pass rush push from the interior. And then the last 2 games playing without DJ Jones as well. Well, you give up, you give up 27 points to KC. Hey, you're going to do that sometimes. You gave up 28 points to the Chargers. I mean, it was a fun game on Sunday, but let's not confuse it. The defense didn't play well in that game by and large, but there was a reason. And you look around, you don't see Draymond Jones and DJ Jones. Baron Browning was dealing with a back issue the previous week, and he wasn't all the way back. Damari Mathis isn't out there. K'Wan Williams was concussed and out of action. I think things finally caught up to the defense in the final 2 or 3 games. But don't let that let that overpower the thoughts of it and the consideration of everything that happened before the end of the season.
I think Evero keeping things together that long is the most commendable thing of the season, because we've been around locker rooms that were split and divided and pointing the finger. You didn't get that from Evero's defense, and that's a credit to him.
It's helpful that he was and is a very good friend of Nathaniel Hackett. And I think that is the thing that Evero functioned with. And we saw to the end that Ejiro Evero didn't want to take the job as interim head coach because he didn't feel right replacing his friend of 20 years. So that's another thing about Ejiro Evero. That's the kind of person I want around, let alone the coach, the tactician, the person who knows how to reach his players and get them to understand these concepts. I want that kind of dude around. I want that kind of loyal person around my building. And, and if things go askew next year, he's not going to point fingers. He's going to say, guys, let's focus on what we can do. And that was the thing you heard from a lot of defensive players in December. Very much, they were just talking about, what can we do? We can't really worry about the rest of it, but what can we do to help this team win? And focus on that rather than saying, oh, well, these guys on offense, they can't do diddly poo.
What are we supposed to do? Those guys suck. I loved what Rosberg said, and we got to peek through keyholes with Jerry Rosberg. That's why I loved him so, is because he would say, guys aren't building their resume. when talking about moving around the offensive coaches or whatever. And you get
Yeah.
that with Evero, like, because the resume will build itself. People
Yep.
in the know already know that Evero is going to be a head coach. It's just a matter of timing and when and the proper coaching cycle.
Yeah. And you know what? I mean, you do well, people are going to notice. Look, we talked about it. Justin Outen, he didn't have to go around pumping his pumping his chest and pounding his chest, I should say, and strutting around trying to get attention. You know what he did? He went out and called 2 really good games with an offense that had done bupkis up to that point, right? That's the resume building right there.
Yeah.
Alton's probably going to end up calling plays for some team here in the next couple of years. And you know what? It was just because when he had an opportunity, he just went out and did well after just doing his job. So credit to him. I think there's a lot of life wisdom and football wisdom, but life wisdom that we could take from Jerry Rosburg. I find myself missing his press conferences. You know what? Maybe I'll just show up at Broncos headquarters tomorrow, hoping that Jerry is somehow in the building, just hanging out.
Can I get you a cup of coffee, Jerry?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to have another chat with you, Jerry. I'd like to. I have more thoughtful questions that I'd like to ask of you. Honestly, like, I really gained an admiration for that man in 2 weeks listening to him. I mean, I miss it already. I need my dose of Jerry Rosburg wisdom. What am I going to do without it?
Hopefully find someone at the Senior Bowl, because that's where you can have those great conversations. I remember a story Matt Waldman tells where he was talking with Ernest Biner, who was like one of his heroes growing up, because he's a Browns fan. And Ernest Biner is just like knowledge. It's like, yeah, exactly. That's why Ted Thompson, God rest his soul, anytime I got a chance to talk to him, or Ozzie Newsome, C.O. Bricado. I was talking to Jeff Legwald in the locker room yesterday about Mr. Bricado, who taught Leggy, and Mr. Bricado, C.O. Bricado is like the base of all scouting.
He's the godfather. He is the godfather of the scouting profession. No doubt.
Yes, very true. So like you get around those type of people, those resources, you just zip the lip and you let them flow, man. You let them flow.
Yeah. Ty's got a question here. How do we feel about Dan Quinn? Personally, don't see the appeal. I admit I'm higher on Dan Quinn than most people. I'd be more than fine with Dan Quinn. I want to see who his offensive coordinator choice is, but he fits that template of a coach who had a fair amount of success in his first stop, probably learned some things, learned what to do, what not to do if he got another chance, good culture builder, and also somebody who, kind of like we're talking about with Jim Harbaugh, is going to tell Russell Wilson what's what. This is what we're doing. Get on board.
Yes. And Russell will listen. So with Dan Quinn, especially, like, it's a relationship business. Everything is in football and in life, but like you've already got that established relationship and you get solid. I think it was Jose in the chat room said he's like John Fox. I'm like, okay, sure.
John Fox was terrific here for the most part. He inherited a mess and he cleaned it up.
Yep.
John Fox doesn't get nearly enough respect from this fan base, in my opinion.
No, not at all. Not at all. But he was perfect exactly for what the team needed at the time. Dan Quinn may not be Harbaugh or Peyton, but he can be great for what the Broncos need at this time and need with Russell Wilson too. So yeah, I would applaud that hiring. There's probably not many that would be on their candidate list, Mace, that I would say, not right now. Not the guy.
Yeah, I like this list better than last year's list. I mean, obviously, it's heavier on the experience, but like, for example, I mean, Raheem Morris was a guy I thought last year should have been on the Broncos list. I love the fact that he's on the list this year, and that's another coach who I feel it will be a lot different for him the second time around than the first time around. I'm not sure he was completely ready for that Tampa Bay job, but also to his credit, I don't count the first year he was on the Bucs job because they had cap issues galore, and they basically clear-cutted it and gutted it and said, okay, you got to make a 5-star dinner with spam and ligaments and lettuce that's been sitting out for a month. Okay, good luck with that, right? But then that second year, they go 10-6. Josh Freeman, a name that I think we've all forgotten, former first-round pick. Josh Freeman, I think, has 25 touchdowns, 6 picks. Looks like he's going to be a great quarterback. Gets a great season out of him. I thought, and then they fell back to earth in 2011. I thought Morris got too much of the blame for that. To his credit, he bided his time. And you talk about somebody who went to places where he could learn from. Like,
and had a lot to rehab after the stop and partying with his players and all that stuff that he did not get a good reputation for. And he's just slowly and steadily worked his way back into it.
He was too young. Like, you could see he's a very good coach. Very, like in terms of running things on. It's, again, go back to that 2010 season in Tampa Bay. In terms of running the operation, I thought did a really good job that year. But I think he went and worked for Mike Shanahan. He went and worked for Dan Quinn in Atlanta, worked on the offensive and the defensive side. He worked for Sean McVay. So here's another thing. Even though he's a defensive coach, he's very tied in with the Shanahan-McVay tree and not a couple of branches removed like Nathaniel Hackett was. This is a guy who worked under Mike and under Sean. So, like, he's a direct descendant of this. And those coaches are the ones that kind of have that direct link to Shanahan McVay are ones that have generally done well. And it's been true whether they've been on the offensive side or somebody like Robert Saleh really changing things for the Jets on the defensive side. So I'm very intrigued by Morris if it gets past kind of those top two names and you go to that next list. And it's same thing also with D'Amico Ryans. You get the same type of kind of credibility and being around the right kind of people to develop as a coach.
Right.
That's where you want to be. So there's I think there's a very careful pattern to this coaching search and the type of coaches the Broncos are looking at.
Yes. And follow that pattern to glory and watch out for 3 more teams. I think we could see a change in Baltimore, outside chance, but there's still a chance. We could see a change in Dallas. We talked about it. And then we're waiting on Sean McVay's decision. So as we wrap up today's show, Mace, know that we have we have the coaching openings, but there's 3 more teams that might be open real soon.
Okay, well, you mentioned Baltimore. All right, I'm going to throw this out to you. John Harbaugh or Jim Harbaugh? John or Jim? Which Harbaugh would you rather have?
It's almost like John has a softer touch. So I would prefer John. Yeah.
I think John's more sustainable.
Yes.
Now, that being said, I believe John Harbaugh is on the other side of 60 years old. So I don't know if you're talking about him being a 10-year guy. Maybe, perhaps. But with Jim Harbaugh, I think we know this is a 3 to 4 year shelf life. Okay. This is, even if he signs a 10-year contract, I do not think Jim Harbaugh is the Broncos coach 10 years from now, or even 5 years from now. But if they sign John Harbaugh to that kind of contract, I think he would see out. He had a chance of seeing out that full length of the contract. So that's, if given the choice. But I think Jose makes a great point. John may take a 1-year break if he gets dismissed in Baltimore.
Right.
I think the change that's going to happen in Baltimore is they're going to move on from Greg Roman. And if Jim Harbaugh takes the Broncos job, it all works out. Roman comes to Denver as the offensive coordinator. Everybody, and John doesn't feel so bad about it. I know he doesn't want to fire Greg Roman. If Greg Roman is sacked there, it's coming from up top and coming from the pressure from the public more so. I don't think it would come in any way from John Harbaugh, but it makes it a little easier to do if John knows that Greg is going to be okay and have another similar job waiting for him. And oh, by the way, Greg Roman has been, of course, Jim Harbaugh's offensive coordinator as well, which brings us back to the whole thing of Jerry Rossberg and why, if you got a Harbaugh running things, you can't dismiss the notion of Rossberg being back maybe in a bigger role than we hope just because of these connections. And that, it's actually interesting to look at how there are these coaches that, even though Jim Harbaugh can be unusual, there are coaches that absolutely swear by Jim Harbaugh and John Harbaugh.
Relationship business. Hashtag Harburg.
Harburg is it Harburg or Rossball? Which one do you prefer?
Probably Harbaugh first, right? So Harburg.
Harburg. Okay. Harburg rolls off the tongue.
Yes.
Rossball is it's a little tougher to say. Harburg has some punch to it.
Rossbaugh sounds like that lunch lady's name that I would give you the slop in middle school. Like, oh, Miss Rossbaugh. She'd always, she didn't even care.
Yeah.
I'd ask for the chocolate milk. She'd just give me the white milk.
Yes. Miss Rossbaugh, do we have chili and cinnamon rolls today?
Oh, that's right.
Miss Rossbaugh.
We know the show has wrapped up when 69mega.com unpaid endorsement joins the chat room. I got to block them. So before we get more porn spam bots here on Orange and Blue today, we'll tie a bow on today's program. He is Andrew Mason. We appreciate everyone for watching, and we're off and running, baby, in draft season. My Broncos draft needs for offense is up right now. My Broncos draft needs for defense will be up tomorrow. Make sure to stay tuned for that. He's Andrew Mason. Follow him on Twitter at Mace Denver. I am at Cecil Lammey. Don't follow me. We are Orange and Blue today. Be safe. Be kind. Know that you are appreciated. Stay tuned. And as always, I ask that you stay frosty.